Hey guys, we are in Nazareth right now. Where we're at the moment is a church. It's called Synagogue Church. When they were doing a lot of the rebuilding of this area, and it started to be settled by a lot of the Christians, they noticed that there was a synagogue, ruins of a synagogue, an ancient synagogue that was here that likely dated back to the 1st century. Now, we don't know with 100% confidence that this is the location, but when they rebuilt this church, you can see that it's very plain. It's very generic. There's not a lot of extras. So the idea there is that they wanted to create something that would largely have matched the size and kind of the simplicity of what would have been there back in the day of Jesus. And so this is the place and time where likely Jesus would have came to the synagogue. It would look different than this. But he would have said these very words. In Luke chapter 4, starting in verse 16, it says, "So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, as was his custom, went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah, and when he opened the book, he found a place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, recovery of sight of the blind, and set liberty to those who are oppressed. He proclaimed the acceptable year of the Lord.'" And then he would have closed the book or the scroll and gave it back to the attendant, and he sat down. And the eyes of all who were in the synagogue were fixed on him, Jesus. And he began telling him, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing." So all bore witness to him, and they marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. He said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" And so you can imagine the reality in that day of how excited it might have been that these words are going to be read, that he would have been sharing these. And then he goes on and he says this. He said to them, "You will surely say this proverb to me, 'Physician, heal yourself. Whatever have you done in Capernaum, do also in your country.' And he said, 'Assuredly I say to you, no prophet is accepted in his own country. But I tell you, many widows were in Israel in the days of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a great famine throughout all the land. But none of them was Elijah sent except to Zarephath, the region of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. And many lepers were in Israel in the time of Elisha the prophet, and none of them were cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." And so you can imagine these words would have been a conversation Jesus would have had that would have spoke to the Gentiles, the Gentile nations of those who would have been provided for through a famine, those who would have been healed of leprosy. It would have been something totally different than would have been expected. And as a result, those in the synagogue, those who would have known Jesus for many, many years, they would have been the ones who would have been filled with wrath, as the scripture said. And they rose up, thrust him out of the city, and led him to the brow of a hill on which the city was built, and they might throw him over a cliff. And passing through the midst, he went his way. What's so cool about Nazareth, guys, is when you're here, you get to see it's built up on a hill, a lot of steep hills. For us to even get here, we had to climb up a steep hill just to be able to come and see this church. They would have taken him outside, just outside the city, right there on a cliff, to be able to throw him over because they thought this man was crazy. But the reality of it is he was telling them the truth. And so all of a sudden, he somehow just slipped right through the crowd. We know that it was not his time yet to die. And he never came back to this town. At that moment, he never, ever came back. And so what a blessing it is for us to be in a place like this where Jesus likely would have stood, likely would have taught in the synagogue, and to be able to see that this would have been a turning point for his ministry, not to come back home ever again after sharing those faithful words that are recorded in Luke chapter 4. Love you guys, and I can't wait to have many of you guys here.